on behalf of UBS Forums, along with our partner Microsoft, G7CR and Zensia, I welcome you all for this exclusive virtual webinar on unlocking exponential for startups.
To start off with the session, we have our keynote speaker for the day, Mr. Sanjay Viswanathan, who is the founder and chairman from AdiGroup. With 30 years of operating expertise in delivering growth and value creation, Sanjay has served as CEO of Sonata Limited, Group Executive Officer at Relics PLC, Vice President at GE or Genpact, Business Leader at Infosys, and Trainer. Also based in London, he now leads Adi Partners globally, the firm he founded in fall 2010. He is graduate of Harvard Business School and Strathclyde University. Over to you, Sanjay, sir.
Well, thank you very much for that very gracious introduction. At the end of the day, what's really exciting is the fact that the ecosystem that's now developing in India is actually extremely well geared for startups, which was not the case when I started my career 30 years ago. And thanks to lockdown, at least we have some gray hair to compensate for the lack of gray matter. Essentially, this is to share some of the best practices. And what I've tried to distill is essentially 4 or 5 key things that all startups need to look at, because there's really no rocket science to this. I think if we just follow the basics, we'll get there. So in a sense, for startups, it's all about growth and value creation, isn't it? So I just want to set the context and say that, look, the decade that we're all entering, which is the next 10 years of excitement, is really around the accelerated digital disruption, which I call D3, because essentially this is about time, space, and matter that's being compressed. And if you now think about this as the context for what would be the sort of hyperscale playbook that startups could adopt based on our own experience, it really comes down to some very basic things, as I said. Firstly, I think what's changed fundamentally is the aspect of having to make sure that we are environmentally and sustainably conscious. And this is really because of the aspect of the global impact that you're seeing. And therefore, I think for startups, it's super important that whatever business we are into now has to mesh and be embedded within the environment. That's number one. The second is very much around the building the right sort of partner ecosystem. Because I think if you have the right sort of partner ecosystem here, we can then build the sort of advocacy and other things that you need going forward, right? And the third is, of course, around, this is what is really turning the playbook on its head, which is what we call the social impact, right? So I want to say this, and I'll show you a couple of case studies as well from our own group as to how we've built businesses and started to accelerate businesses around keeping these 3 things in mind. Number one, how do we become environmentally conscious and contribute to sustainability? Second, how do we build a partner ecosystem that's based on advocacy? And third, therefore, create social impact. The fundamental thing that underpins any business to make this happen, and this is where I think for startups it becomes super important, is culture. And if you think about it, culture has actually come a full circle for us, because if you think about this visual, what it really connotes is openness, transparency, and diversity. If you think about corporations, 70, 80, even 100 years ago, where there wasn't the internet or the technology that we have, openness was getting people in a room. And now in a distributed world, it's about openness with technology. Secondly, when you think about diversity, it's about having not just cultural diversity, but also how can you build other elements of it like gender, thought, and so on. And finally, how do you make it transparent so that at the end of the day, even when you have a distributed workforce, you're able to build a culture of togetherness. And therefore, this leads me to the next topic, which is customer experience, which is ultimately, that's what drives any business, isn't it? When you think about this, customers are pretty clear that there's this danger of hot air, right? I mean, all of us try and do a few things to please a customer, but a customer today has become extremely discerning, and she knows when what we're saying is not entirely authentic. So therefore, to be authentic is super important in customer experience. And then what this is really tearing the walls off is the fact that customer loyalty now cannot be taken for granted. In the past, when you won a customer, it would be set in stone, but that isn't the case anymore. And therefore, if you really want the business to take off, comes the third piece, which is white glove service. And it is easier said than done, because in especially distributed business, or when you're doing one-to-many, especially, how do you provide optimal white glove service? But if you keep these two fundamental pillars in mind that underpins white glove service, which is winning customer loyalty that is set in stone, making sure that we're not just blowing hot air. Now, let me take you through two case studies. Now, if you recall, I talked about the social impact, partner ecosystem, and the global compact. So let me play you a short commercial which underpins the mental wellness business that we went about doing.
Look where we are with lockdown. We don't quite know how much further we have to go. But one thing that we do know is we are getting towards the end. If we were to give up now, we will probably never forgive ourselves, because in 10, 20, 50 years time, we will look back and we will be able to say, we got through that, rather than look back and go, I wish we had tried that little bit harder.
We can take away some amazing lessons: structure, very focused, accountability, never give up. Pain is temporary, quitting is permanent.
So in a sense, I think what this commercial intended to do when we launched CARE, which was COVID Anxiety Relief, was essentially around the fact that if we had to create social impact around mental wellness, which is a big bet we were making as a new business, it was important that we brought in an icon like Kenton Cool, who hasn't climbed the Everest once, but 14 times. So think about building a business being the equivalent of climbing the mental Everest for us, right? So we brought someone like Kenton Cool in to showcase that ultimately climbing the Everest was not just a physical thing, because as Kenton himself says, when you have to summit the Everest, the last 1,000 meters is the most difficult. And that's when all the games in the mind start playing, because at high altitude, you've got depression and a variety of things that set in. And a lot of people give up when they're just 1,000 meters away from the world's highest peak. And the reason someone like Kenton has been able to climb it 14 times, and in fact, he would have done it the 15th, but for lockdowns, and yet you can see how positive he is as a human being, is because in his mind, it's all about how do you conquer in the spirit of capability and execution. And that's what it is at the end of the day. How do you conquer the mind? And for startups, it's very much around that. But I wanted to bring this in, especially because we've gone on to build a mental wellness business. And when you think about the impact of what we've done with this, it is truly quite stunning. We then went on to tie this up with Christmas. Now, as many of you know, Christmas is a time that happens is the coldest part of the year in the West. And that's when depression and anxiety and other things really peak. So we decided to launch a campaign called Care for Christmas, to one, position our brand Care as something that cares for people. Secondly, at a time they need it the most. And if you think about social impact and environment, etc., this was an opportunity for us to show that we mean what we say. So we actually impacted 250 million people by giving away Care, as we called it, at less than the cost of a latte. Let me show you that campaign.
Positivity is infectious.
On the back of this, the impact that we created was quite significant because what it essentially helped us do is show that we could impact over 250 million people. We ran a sustained campaign across a variety of platforms using PR as the main driver. And this is again goes back to our advocacy platform. I think when you do it with PR, you get a lot more credibility around a new idea. Yeah? So let me show you what we're doing with education. We're trying to showcase with that is very much around saying education is fundamentally a sector that one can create social impact with. So the pivot that we chose was to essentially go with the National Open Schooling Platform, which is NEOS, the world's largest out of India. And the objective for us is to partner with them along with Microsoft. This whole technology of Bleap is actually built on the Microsoft platform. And our objective eventually is to be able to impact 250 million children in India at some point. So we're starting with small, even if we impact about 5 to 6 million children over the next 2 or 3 years, it would be quite tremendous. Because what we're bringing to the table along with Microsoft here is quite compelling. We also have partners like Jio and Flipkart because we now, believe it or not, the only digital school that's available on Flipkart. The objective of being on Flipkart was essentially the fact that we wanted to demystify education. Because, firstly in India, for all of us, born and raised in India, education is super important. And we all know how difficult it is to get into a good school, right? And the objective with Bleap, as we call it, which is blended learning and pedagogy, essentially is to democratize access to education. So anyone who wants to study can be able to study now on Bleap. And the objective, therefore, by being on something like Flipkart is to say, you can now get education and study just as if you would go and buy a phone on Flipkart, right? And if you think about the price point, good quality education in India costs at least $1.5 lakh or 2 a year. And again, when I talk about social impact, we are now delivering this entire product end to end at less than 5,000 rupees for the whole year. So the objective again here is very much to create social impact, to be able to transform a nation on the back of education. And even if we can impact a small percentage of that, I think we would have helped start a movement. This is the social media campaign that we are running now across Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, etc. And let me play a short GIF that brings. Right? So in a sense, that was it. It's a fairly straightforward way to build any business, as you can see. If I was to summarize, we should always think about how we can create a business that is not just environmentally conscious, but also can create sustainability. Second, how do we bring a partner ecosystem around us? And if you think of both the businesses that I showcased to you, we couldn't have built the mental wellness business without having partners in that ecosystem, Wiser, Remente, and Total Brain. And likewise, we would not be able to accelerate our education business if we didn't have Microsoft, Jio, Flipkart, ETS, and we are just on the threshold of appointing a partner for the device. And believe it or not, once we get the device on board, it would be a game changer for us. So I think if you keep all of that in mind, and underpinning all of this is social impact. Regardless of what business you start now, because of the decade of digital disruption I was talking about, social impact is the one that... Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay.